All right, so welcome back from break. Before we went to break, we said that we had finished the mindsets part of the day. Now let me throw a little caveat into that. As we say we finish the mindsets part of the day, I would like you to encourage you to never finish the mindsets. And so although we're moving on, we will never let go of those mindsets. And so we'll keep referring back to them not only for the rest of today, but along the 12-week journey, you'll spend time focusing on those mindsets. And hopefully, as Maria has done, they'll just become more and more and more the way you think about prospecting going forward. Moving past the mindsets, once Maria learned to think certain ways, she started to act and do things differently based on how she thought. And so the next part of the day, really for the remainder of the day, we're going to focus on the skill sets and tool sets that follow along with the mindset shift that she has made. And so we're going to look at it through the lens of 3 different skill sets. The first is the concept of prioritizing. When you think about rethinking the funnel, Maria learned that there was a prioritization to how she should be choosing who she calls upon. We'll focus some time on a tool there called the Prioritize tool. Once she prioritized, she then learned what it meant to truly prepare. Again, very often we say we just don't have time. She realized in rethinking the funnel that she gained time. We talked about rediverting that time into preparing and actually researching the companies and prospects she was going to call on. And then finally, we'll spend some time at the end of the day on that prospecting call plan. Once we've done the research, once we've prioritized and we're ready to actually reach out, how do we plan effectively for that? And we'll spend some time preparing you so that at the end of that part of the day, you've actually got a plan in place that you can enact as soon as you walk out of here. So it's a very hands-on part of the day. We're going to jump back in, revisit Maria and Craig, and check in on how Maria started to focus on this prioritized concept. If you want to take some notes for yourself, you can just take some notes right there on page 13 as Maria describes to you this whole concept of prioritization.
Let's revisit Maria. As I've said, she's a good example of what we've observed the top salespeople achieve in trying to connect with new opportunities. What she sees, does, and gets as a result of her prospecting is very different than other salespeople. She no longer sees sales as just a numbers game. She now sees it as focus and execution. Rather than approach 100 potential buyers with the same message, she prioritizes the 5 organizations most likely to benefit from what she offers. She takes the energy others would put into the 100 and invests it in the higher probability 5. If a prospective client comes off her list of 5, she adds the next one in line. She continues working through her target population 5 at a time. While 5 may not be the right number for your situation, perhaps it should be 2 or even 20. The point is to prioritize and focus your resources on a manageable number of prospects at one time. Maria sees the value of doing this and does it well. How we see the world guides what we do, which determines the results we get. If we see the world of sales as just a numbers game, what do we do when we aren't getting the results we want? We increase the numbers. We take what isn't working and do more of it. We increase the quantity of activity rather than the quality. By developing a better mindset and rethinking the funnel, we put better, higher probability opportunities into the top of the funnel. And because our time isn't overburdened by making hundreds and thousands of cold calls, we are able to do the necessary work to get better results out of the bottom of the sales funnel. With the right mindset and a better focus, we increase the value of each prospect exponentially by developing lasting respect, trust, and value with everyone we interact with.
Now, as you saw Maria learn that behavior, I saw a couple head nods and a little bit of laughter there as it talked about when something's not working, we just do more of it. How many of you have ever done that? Right? We're not where we need to be, and so we just make more calls, even though the calls we made weren't effective. And so we need to think about this a different way. And so let's dive into, on page 14, dive into this concept of prioritization as the first skill set that we're going to focus on. Again, based on the mindset of rethinking the funnel, Maria begins to prioritize her prospecting. And so we're going to focus on something that we call reason, not random. I'd like to actually underline that on page 14 in your book, reason, not random at the top. Think about it. If a sales leader walked by your office and you were on the phone calling a prospect, and the sales leader said, hey, real quick, why that one? Why did you choose that prospect? What do you think would be some of the answers some salespeople would give to that sales leader as to why they chose that prospect of every other one that they could have called upon? Was the next one in line, right? Well, I'm going through the phone book alphabetically, and I'm still in A's. And so there's reasons, but they're random in nature. And so we want to think about it in terms of business reasons. Why am I choosing to focus my time on one versus another? And so let's take a look at what we call possible reasons to talk with a prospect. Now, we have done some work and done some thinking and came up with about 6 or 7 of these that are common. Now, they might not all be applicable to you, but they're common in the industry. Look at the very first one, for instance. A trigger event has happened. How many of you are familiar with trigger events? So someone got hired, someone got fired, there was an acquisition, there was a reason to reach out to this customer now. And so we call those trigger events. That might be something that you would say is a reason to call. You go down and say it'd be a big influence on other companies. And so, man, if I could land that account, I'd be able to use that account to segue into other accounts. You might look at, we've got a contact or a referral there, and that might be a really good reason. So these are 6 or 7 different reasons that we find some people value in terms of how to prioritize. Some may be applicable to you, some may not. And so what we want to do is add to this list through the real world reality that you sit in. So if you take a look down below, there's 4 more additional lines. What I would like you to do is read through those 7, really think about what they're saying to you in terms of business reasons, and then add to the list. In addition to those 7, what would be some other reasons that you specifically would choose to call some of your prospects versus others? Now, we're not saying you won't choose to call them, but why this one first? What are some business reasons specific in your industry and your company? Add to this list 3 or 4 additional reasons why you would choose personally to call on some versus others. Let me give you a couple minutes to fill out that section. Add to this list, what are some additional business reasons specific to you as to why you would choose to prioritize one prospect versus another? Again, very often we can learn from others. And so real quick, let's just call it a couple that you added in. And if you hear someone say something that you didn't think of, just quickly add it to your list. Who would offer something that they added on to the ones that were currently in the book?
I heard through the market, or I read somewhere that they were opening an RFP. And I would like to show interest in being invited to that RFP and understand their business problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So somehow I found out there was an RFP coming on the horizon and I want to be involved in it. Great reason. What's another one?
So I know you guys already have done good work for companies like them, but usually direct competitors. So just bring it down to the next level. So if we're working with this financial institution and it's going well and we have a good story, we go on to the next financial institution.
Okay, so not only have we done good business with someone like them, but now you're looking at the competition level. And so we've done good business and there's a competitive nature there. We can go in and try and get business from our competitors. I like it. What else?
I have 2. One, that the industry itself is changing, so if the company's going to have to experience change, why not be a part of the good and positive change? Yeah. And the other one is I'm a business, but we also are a nonprofit. So for me, I look for a lot of companies that have community leadership, and a lot of times they're looking for ways to give back, so I give them opportunities to do so.
Nice. Like them. 2 great ones. What else? Dan?
I don't think it's captured in the bullets above, but your go-to-market plan can involve either some of their products or services in a joint venture approach. Nice. Create a new market.
Create a new market. So hey, you and I can together do great things. And so absolutely, your go-to-market strategy could align with theirs to create a new business together. I like it. One more. Go ahead.
This ties right into what was just mentioned, but I have a new product effort that makes excellent sense for their current applications.
Yep. And maybe it's a brand new product that you just innovated, or you made an acquisition and so there's a need and you can match it to that new product. I like that one. There's one more over here. Someone else have one?
I'm not sure if it's on the list, but if you have current contracts and you have people co-located with that customer and they're doing account planning, through the discovery of the account planning, through either they're down selecting their current provider on something, you might have an opportunity to talk to with your relationships to get your company in there help them solve their business
Absolutely,
problems through that
yeah.
process.
If you didn't hear that one, you're currently doing business with them. You've got some employees co-located. They're hearing some things through the grapevine. It's a great opportunity to reach out to them and try and go broader and deeper and help them in that capacity. All of those are excellent reasons, and there's probably even more that we haven't even thought of at that point in time. When you think about the prioritization, here's where you got to start doing some work. Now, for this next section, probably the next 10, 15 minutes, we're going to do things very staccato, meaning that I'm going to give you a set of instructions. You do that, hang tight, come back, and we're just going to work back and forth like that to make it through this next section. First thing I need you to do is look at all of those business reasons, the ones that we populated to begin with, the ones that you added, and the ones that others added. So you should have a pretty comprehensive list there. And I want you to put a check mark beside 5 of them. The top 5 that you think are most applicable to you. All of them may be, but which 5 rise to the top? And just put a check mark beside them. Don't number them yet, just check mark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put 5 check marks on that list. The 5 that you think are most applicable to you. Again, it may be a struggle. You're letting go of some, and that's the exact purpose of the concept of prioritization. They all might fit, but which are the 5 best? Once you've got 5 check marks, and this may take a little bit more thinking, once you've got 5 check marks, I need you to actually put them into numerical order 1 through 5. So of all of those on your list, what is the top reason that you would choose to call one prospect over another? This step may be difficult. Fight through it, because this is really an important part of this tool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that order. And it's very important that you think about them in that order. List them 1 through 5. Right, there's the old saying, the example teaches. So I'm going to welcome you to actually turn your participant manual sideways, and let's take a look at page 15, which is an example of Maria's. And so again, this is a skill set that Maria has learned to do well. And this is an example of her prioritization tool. So let's walk this through step by step up here on the screen in terms of how she did this. Once we learn how she did it, we're going to have you do the exact same thing with your prioritization tool in the book. So you see a blank tool here on the screen. On the left-hand side is the name of the companies or prospects that you're going to be calling on. Across the top are the criterion that you're choosing, the reason over random. And they are in very specific order, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you notice on the tool, there's a multiplier that goes with each of the criterion. So that business criterion that you chose as the top reason is actually weighted at a times 10. All the way down to number 5 would be a times 2. That's why it's very important that you have those in numerical order. Now, is there flexibility in the tool that those may change over time? Absolutely. So as you start going on your prospecting, you thought big revenue was the number 1 reason because you were thinking from your point of view, but you actually learned that referral is a much higher reason. And so there's an adaptation that you can do on the tool. Very first thing she does is she puts her top 5 criterion in place in order. Now, these may be very different than yours, but you see that she chooses large revenue potential. It's a big influence on other companies. The issues and results that they are showing, we actually address those. She has a contact or a reference in the account, and the company wishes to expand. That's the 5 that fit Maria very well. She transfers them right from that list right onto the tool, and we'll have you do the same thing. Next, she goes down and lists her prospects. Who's currently in her prospecting pipeline? Who is she wanting to call on and do business with? This next step is really, really important. Once she lists the companies in order, now again, these are just randomly thrown on here, she then begins to objectively rate each business against each criteria. What do you think I mean by objectively rate? What do you think I mean there?
Her view.
Say it again.
Her view.
Her view, I like it. What's objective versus subjective mean? When I say you have to objectively rate these, what am I saying? You've got data and input. Think about it from a business perspective, right? So all of a sudden, if systems integrators, let's just say, is it's the largest prospect she's ever had, would there be an indication for her to maybe want that one to be prioritized higher? That's subjective in nature, right? You got to kind of keep away the subjectivity and just rate them for what they are. Be objective. Well, so all of a sudden this is the highest revenue one, and she thinks about a referral. And she's like, well, I kind of know somebody that kind of knows somebody. I'll rate that one a 3. No, that's a 1. If she's subjectively rating it, she's going to kind of edge those all up because she wants that to be the top prospect. For the tool to work most, you have to be objective. So she sits down and she thinks it through, and she just simply rates each one of the criterion against each of the prospects. And so she looks at business IT and says, that is by far a large revenue potential. But then if you look at the contact and reference, it's a 1. She doesn't have one. And so although it's a high value dollar for her, she does not have a reference. That's an example of what we mean by being objective in nature, not influencing that up a little bit because you want that one to rate the highest. She rates them all out, and then because she's doing it on paper just like you're doing, she then does the multiplication. So she rates it a 5 times 10, that weights it a 50, 24, so on and so forth. And then she just goes across the rows and adds them up. And you see on the screen, as you do in the example, that if the tool is used well and used objectively, the tool will create your prioritized prospecting list for you. So based on the criterion she chose, who is her top prospect? Reach Enterprises, right? And so whether she wanted it to be or not, it's not as large. It's a pretty large deal, but it's not as large as that deal. But when you're all weighed in, fully factored, that's what it ends up being. And now she has reason versus random to call on these people. So let's transfer this and do a little bit of work on this for you. Now, if you notice on the side of or bottom of page 15, you see that little gray box? And you see that little, I guess we look at it as a USB icon. There is an electronic version of this that you have on the thumb drive or the CD-ROM. When you do it in the electronic format, this is all done for you. We don't have a chance to use electronic today, so you're going to have to do some math. So we'll give you plenty of time to work through the math numbers. And so let's actually turn to a blank prioritize tool and watch this thing in action for ourselves live. And so if you look over on page 16, you see a totally blank prioritization tool. What was the very first step Maria did? Rate the criterion, right? Now, to keep the math simple, I'm just going to ask you to transfer your top 3 business reasons. So if you go back onto the business reasons page, page 14, just take 1, 2, and 3 and list them right onto your prioritize tool on page 16. Don't do all 5. The math gets comprehensive. Just do 3. Number 1, number 2, number 3, in that order, onto the criterion. Once she transferred her criterion, what was the second step? List the companies, right? So all of those companies that you are currently focused on in terms of prospecting. So who's out there that you want to do business with? Again, for the sake of this tool, if you get 3 or 4 of them down there, that's fantastic. You don't have to fill in the complete column, just 3 or 4 names. Put down some company names currently in your prospecting pipeline. And then what was the final step for her? To do what? To rate them. How? Objectively, right? You gotta have the objectivity in there, right? So objectively, criterion by criterion, rate those prospects on each of those business reasons. 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. Do the math for that box. If you rated it a 5, it's in the first criterion. It'll have a weight of 50. Do all 3 criterion, then carry the addition of those criterion all out to the far right-hand column, and you'll see the tool begin to work. And I'll give you a couple minutes to use the tool. you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll come around. One of the things you may notice as you're filling out the tool is that you don't have a great deal of differentiation amongst the prospects. As you add more and more criterion, the difference becomes greater. And so we're only using 3 for the example. So when you use the tool and you weight all 5, you start seeing more separation amongst the numbers. All right, let's pull you in. And you may not be done with that, and that's okay, because again, as you get into the implementation phase, you're going to come back and revisit this. You'll have the electronic tool, and we spend an entire week just on this concept alone. But as you begin to touch it and feel it and kind of get some hands-on with it, give me some thoughts about the concept of prioritization and how you may use and apply this tool.
I think it will definitely help. I mean, it's a huge step because like we get leads through a tool. And so you do your little research. If they provide you with a website, you go look at their company, blah, blah, blah. And then you start seeing, is there potential for this particular client? So you start creating your list of what you're looking for.
Yeah, I like the blah, blah, blah. You do the research, blah, blah, blah. We're going to pay attention to that blah, blah, blah here in a little while. And so amongst all of that, now we've got some real business criterion to weight that against. And so how do we take all of that and objectively rate it into a tool to begin to focus our energies? As I was walking around, I saw some of you with some pretty high numbers in the high 1-teens, like 115, 116. I was just joking to one, I'm like, okay, go make the call now. Like if it's rated that high, go. Like that, you got to get on the phone now. And so as you use the tool, it begins to help you prioritize your prospecting list from that standpoint. And so again, if you take a look at your book, over on, as I said, on the bottom of page 16 or side of page 16, again, this tool is electronic. And it's much simpler to use electronically. You can just click on the radio buttons and it fills out for you and does all the math. And also, we will be spending an entire week just on this concept. So in the playbook, 1 week is spent on the concept of prioritization and getting better and better and better at it. So one of the things we want to spend a little bit more time on before we leave this issue of prioritization is the concept of a referral. Now, if you take a look at Maria's, and it may be different for you, having a referral or a reference was weighted as the 4th most important criterion for her. Just by show of hands, how many of you actually had that criterion in your list of 5? Raise your hands for me. Yeah, that's what we figured. And so if you think about it, in today's world, that's becoming more and more and more a key issue in our prospecting. And so we wanted to just share some thinking with you on that. If you take a look at this graph, and this graph is over on page 17 in your participant manual, will someone describe to me what you see in that graph there? What is the graph telling you? Take a look at the title, the percentages, interpret the data. What is it telling you? I like the way it's said. Relationships matter. I love it. How else would you interpret that data? What does it tell you?
An internal referral is going to get you much closer to where you want to be to possibly closing your sale.
Yeah, just a little bit more?
A lot more.
A lot more. You look at this data, and the question that it says to me is, how could you do this without having a referral? Because if you think about it, I'd love to know statistically, what's the further column to the far left? If you had no referral at all, no network, it was just literally a cold call, what do you think the percentage chance would be that they'd take your call? It's probably 0, right? And so you think about it, when you just call in without having that concept of a networked referral, an external referral, or even possibly an internal referral, it's just statistically speaking, it increases our chance so great. The question becomes, though, is how do I get that referral? And so what we want to do is do a little bit of a table exercise to think about that, because it changes so fast in technology and electronics and social media, and so many things are changing literally at the speed of light. And so how do we keep up with that? So if you take a look down at page 17, the question becomes, what are some best practices, some tips in terms of building my network? So if you think of that referral is going to come from your network. To be able to use my network to get the referral, I have to have a network. But where do I get one of those, right? And so let's do a little bit of work as a table to identify. Take a look at the instructions on the bottom of page 17. As a group or a table, discuss tools, methods, and resources that you can use in today's professional world to build your network. How do you proactively build a professional network in today's business world? So as a table, just discuss that, put down some bullet points and thoughts there on the bottom of page 17. If I don't know how to do this, what tips, advice, tools, technologies, resources would you tell me that I should invest some time in to build my referral base? As a table, if you would discuss that issue and just put down some bullet points. All right, so again, let's pull you in and have a larger group discussion, and I highly encourage you, if someone shares something you haven't thought about, to take some notes and add it to your list here. So who would throw out something that you have found valuable in terms of being able to build your professional network? Who would throw something out? I didn't hear what you said. LinkedIn, okay? So let's be specific about LinkedIn, because that's a whole big body of work. And so what about LinkedIn?
You could find people that have common backgrounds, common industry, client base that you're looking to, to target. You can find out if you know people that are there, or make the connections.
Okay.
You know somebody that I want to meet, so I can reach out to you to try to meet them.
Okay, so using the networking capacity of LinkedIn to get to people, okay? Who else has an idea by show of hands? Let's just stick with LinkedIn for a minute, because it's a really rich resource. Anything else in terms of effectively using LinkedIn? Barbara, you had half a hand up there. Not on LinkedIn. We'll come back to you. What else?
Groups are another place. Probably the most powerful part of LinkedIn is that you can get involved in groups and expand the network, and you post things and get conversations going, and that's a great way to build your network.
Absolutely. So being involved in a group, right? So just not signing up for a group to say I belong to the group, but being involved in a group.
Not
I
promoting
recently
yourself.
read an article that talked about, I think they called it something like the high value 15, which was every Monday morning, put 15 minutes into LinkedIn. And one of the things was respond to a group question. So it's not just linking to the group that makes it effective, it's actually being involved in those group conversations and finding out what's going on. Anything else with LinkedIn specifically? Yes.
Obviously, you use your personal connections to help with introductions into the businesses you're looking to reach out to.
Okay. Sometimes we have a lot of connections, right? So there's kind of two ways to build your network. Some people just accept anybody, some people are very specific, but use that network to get the referral. And so are you actively using that network to find those referrals? What about outside of LinkedIn? What else did you come up with by show of hands? Yes, Barbara.
The table here talked about channel partners. Staying really close to them and letting them know that you've got good relationships with them, so you can help them, become a good reference for them on things that they're trying to do with their customers as well. So I think that's a great avenue for people to use, and my observation is it's probably not used enough.
Yeah, and that's what we find with a lot of these things is that they seem to be common sense. We said that earlier, they're common sense, but they're not used enough. And so effectively using those channel partner relationships, let me help you, and really building and developing those relationships. I like it. Who else, by show of hands, has another tip, trick, resource? Back in the back table, yeah.
No, you can say it. It was great.
I've seen this be real effective in my past life. Becoming a subject matter expert, leveraging the social media tools, get you to the right audience, get you across industries if you're in a horizontal, if you have a horizontal solution, and gains you a lot of respect.
Yeah. Yeah, interestingly, who knows, but I read one time that if you read 9 current books, you would be a subject matter expert. Sounds like a lot. It really isn't a lot. So if you go out there and read 9 books on prospecting, you're a subject matter expert at that point, and you could jump into any group, any blog, any discussion, and truly add value to people. And so if you think about needing a referral, if I've done something in some way to add value to you, and then I need help back from you, that reciprocity, I've done something for you, now do something for me, would be key. And so really becoming a subject matter expert, getting involved in those groups, the blogs, the social media, to really add value to others. I love that one. What else, by show of hands? Something else you can think of? Yes, over here.
Professional societies or industry organizations that you can participate in.
Yeah. For instance, can you think of one? Do you have one that you belong to, or?
Well, engineering, a professional engineers group, or National Petroleum Refining, something like that. But you have local networks that you can use.
Yeah. Now, is this online or is this actually physically in person?
It's physically in person.
Wow.
They
So actually,
get
there's
kinda
like
old school
people.
networking, not
Wow.
LinkedIn in contrast.
I joke because, again, it's the regression to the mean where a lot of people are saying that those types of things, elbow to elbow, is really going to start coming back. Where if you remember, if you've been around for a while, you go back 10, 15 years, it was the business card exchanges and all those kind of things. That kind of went away because it was, oh, well, I've got 500 people on LinkedIn I can get to. And it's reverting back to that, let's rub elbows, let's get to know the person and really develop those relationships. So professional networks, I love that one. What else? What else helps just build a referral? All right, back here.
Came up with industry events.
I didn't hear what you said.
Industry events.
Like what? Can you
Like
give me an
in
example?
ours would be travel.
Okay.
The different conferences that are out there for travel, that are
Yeah.
travel related.
And attending those events, right? So you're actually getting into the event, attending them, networking, and again, professionally, personally building that professional network. I like it. Over here, you had your hand up.
Volunteering opportunities. I volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, and I met with someone who I was a client or a prospect I was trying to get into. That person worked there, and she was able to connect me with some decision makers.
Wow. So yeah, win-win all the way around, right? And so using volunteer opportunities to get out in the community, give back, meeting other professionals and using those resources that way. I love that one.
Yeah.
I can guarantee that wasn't on a lot of your lists, so get your pen out and start writing that one down, because that's a good one. So volunteer opportunities, that's an awesome one. Great win all the way around. What else? Other opportunities to build our professional network. Back here in the back.
College Alumni Association.
Yeah. Just something about our college, isn't there? I don't know what it is. I've never been able to figure it out, man. But if you've went to college with someone, they could be separated by 30 years of graduation. You call me like, hey, I went to Wheeling Jesuit. And they're like, oh, and you're like instantaneously bond to that person. So are we effectively using that entire network strategy? Again, and that's through LinkedIn. You can join that through Facebook. You can join that through the Alumni Association. Again, maybe think about mixing the volunteering, giving back to the Alumni Association and doing things to build that reference. And another great example. Again, add these to your list. I keep saying that for a reason, because we're going to have to actually use that list here in a couple minutes. What else? Anything else you can think of in terms of resources, tools, techniques? Good dialogue. One more up
If
here.
you work at a large company, you can leverage your internal relationships. I mean, you could literally cold call inside your company for, let's say, 20 minutes and ask who they know. Are they working on accounts? If you're on the sales side, maybe you can talk to the client services side, someone who you wouldn't normally talk to.
Everybody has neighbors, right? Everybody has friends. Everybody else has other college associations that they belong to. And so even inside of your own company, again, you get to a certain size of a company, you don't even know who these people are. And so networking inside of your own company, another great example. So if you think about it, lots and lots of good, and again, there's so many others, and there's lots of good books out there in the marketplace on how to build this network. The challenge is if referrals get us in, especially in-company referrals at an 84% likelihood that the person will take our call, we've got to effort to get that. To get that, you have to have the network. And so if you think about it, we look at it through the step of saying that so often when we ask professionals why they don't do more of this, what do you think they say? What's the number one reason why professionals don't do more networking? I don't have time, right? They're busy. I'd love to. I totally get the value of it. It makes common sense. I just don't have the time. And so we want to get to the place where we literally just take away those excuses. So here's what I would like you to do. If you look at the bottom of that page, step 2 on that page says actually circle 1 or 2 of those. So it says identify 1 or 2 best practices, referral tactics you will commit to use going forward. If you look down all the way at the bottom of that page in that gray box, it actually says on week 11, you're going to focus more on obtaining quality referrals. And so what I'd like you to do is go in the list you just made. Hopefully you added some of those great comments people provided. Circle 2 of them that you will proactively stop using excuses and do more of them. During week 11, you'll have an entire week to focus on this concept in and of itself. An entire week based on building referrals. What are you going to do during that week? Circle 1 or 2 of them that you'll focus on during that week. Again, so as you think about the implementation, week by week, we just move along for 12 straight weeks, focusing on all of the content we've learned today. And so this is where this will come back into play. Not that you'll wait for 11 weeks to start focusing on this, but during that 1 week, you have an entire week to focus just on getting referrals. So as we wrap up the first skill set, which is to prioritize, we're going to turn over to page 18 and take a look at the second skill set of value calling. So again, Maria efforted, she worked hard to uncover the mindsets of rethinking the funnel, and intent counts more than technique. With that new thinking, she began to apply new skill sets and tool sets. She first focused on the concept of prioritization. I've got to have better reasons other than it was the next one on my list. She focuses on developing very clear criterion, objectively weights against, and now has an order to which she's going to call. In this next section, we're going to focus on the preparation that she does, and we're going to focus on two things. First, researching company and researching people. Or as it was said back here, Pat, was it blah, 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 or yada, yada, yada? It was something like that. It was something like that. So we're going to focus on the yada, yada, yada part. What does it mean in today's business world to effectively research a person before you reach out to them, to effectively research the company? And then secondly, we're going to try to get out of our own head and get into our prospect's head and really define value from the client's point of view. And so those are the two steps that Maria has begun to focus on. Let's break them down and take a look at this research first. So if you look in the middle of page 18, we've got a list, pretty common list if you think about it. Any one of you probably could have made a very similar list. You can read it yourself. I don't need to read it to you. But as we think about research, these are the kind of things that we're talking about. When it comes to the company, you see a couple things there. Again, that whole concept of a trigger event. They've got a new CEO in place, or the CFO was let go for certain reasons, or it might be that they're facing significant competition in the marketplace. A lot of key things that you research when you focus on researching a company. When you focus on a person, again, you look at, and we mentioned some of these in last, in terms of memberships and posts and blogs that they make. It's not a question of what do I research in today's world. It's more of a question of where do I research it? Where do I find all of this information? So what we want you to do is turn down to page 18, just like we did just a minute ago. Let's actually break this one down into pairs. And so if you did a group of 3 earlier, switch it around a little bit, put that third person with the pair that was at your table earlier. And just briefly go through an exercise to fill in on the company and the people, the where to look for this stuff. So again, most of us understand the what. We know what to look for. We know we should look for the trigger events and new people that have been hired and fired in current competitive marketplace and risks in them. We know that stuff. We just don't know where to best find it in today's business world. So in pairs or in groups of 3, middle of bottom of page 18, just again, list some tips and best practices. Where do you find this type of information in today's electronic age? So if you'll get into pairs or triads and just list some tips, tools, resources, where do you go when you try to find this type of information? All right, let me pull you back in. Again, just a demonstration of the shared experience of a large group. Let's talk about bottom of page 18. Where do we look for this type of stuff? So again, sometimes it's very obvious what we're looking for. You see a list there, and you can probably add to that list. But where do we find it in today's world? So by show of hands, who would offer a place where we can actually go find some of this stuff? If you just raise your hand. Where do you go? Over here. Yes.
Do you want me to go on the company side?
Either one, whichever you want to go.
Okay. Company, I'd go website, LinkedIn, industry publications, Manta, Marketo, local newspaper, Facebook and Twitter.
Everybody got those all? Let's break that down. A couple very familiar, a couple we don't know. So read your list again, and let's stop on some to focus on.
Go to the company website to
Okay,
start.
so that was our first place back there, wasn't it, Pat? Company website.
And then you go to LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Now, what about LinkedIn? So researching companies, people, all of that? Both?
Both.
Okay. What about company? What do you use LinkedIn for in terms of researching companies?
Well, the company website will usually segment all of the employees, so then you can go in there and find out who the key contacts are in the
By level, right?
Right.
So do you want executive level? You can tag by that, yep.
Or if you want to search for it, you can use LinkedIn to search.
Okay, if you can effectively use searches. And a lot of times one of the things I like about LinkedIn is it'll tell you if someone that viewed this also viewed these. Some interesting things pop up there. You're like, where else are people looking? And so a lot of good stuff inside of LinkedIn. What else did you say?
Industry publications. So well, it depends on the industry. You were talking about the oil industry, or so There's probably industry publications that are specific to that, and I'm sure people subscribe to that and/or advertise in that.
Okay, yep, I like that, looking for advertisements. What else was on your list?
Manta and Marketo, those are just two database organizations. Some of them are free services, some of them you have to pay for.
Okay, so just two online resources of data. Okay, and so let's just throw out others that are like that anybody else put down. And so that's two. What are some others?
The list online,
Is that the name of it?
data.com, the list online.
That's
yes.
the name of it? The List Online?
Yes.
What an interesting name. So go to the list. Where'd you get that? Oh, the List Online. It's a great name.
Data.com, which is part of Salesforce.
Yeah. Yeah, they're supposed to have one of the purest data sets in the marketplace. That's their niche. And so that's an interesting one. If you're not familiar with that one, write that one down and look it up.
And Data.com was Jigsaw and then Dun & Bradstreet data as well. So
Some very accurate data in there.
we also said as a group, Glassdoor, TechCrunch, Crunchbase, Google Alerts.
How many of you are familiar with all these that are being thrown out? Anybody? I've heard of some of them, but there's so many out there. So can you say those again real quick? And again, if you're in that industry, just write some of these names down and do some research on them.
Glassdoor, TechCrunch, Crunchbase, Yahoo Finance, Google Alerts.
Yeah, Google Alerts are interesting. So talk about that for a second. So what about Google Alerts? How can that help me out?
Well, in our organization, we're very vertically focused. So I focus on retail. So I could set up alerts that are tied to certain companies that if there's a shift in executive management or acquisitions, mergers, whatever that might be across different verticals, you can receive alerts through email or real-time alerts on what these changes are. So that is one of those trigger events, an example of a trigger event that might prompt you to call or prospect or change your approach, a more targeted approach.
And I've learned that with those, you have to be very specific in your criterion. Otherwise, your inbox fills up really quick. And so you set the criterion. You can be very, very specific with it. At what level, gets hired, gets fired, gets advanced. There's all kinds of different criterion. And so, again, you get what you give in terms of those. So the more information you give it, the quality you'll get back from that. And so if you just set up, big company looking for this, all of a sudden your inbox, every single time there's a trigger event, it starts to fill up. So you learn to get better and better and better at that. Thanks for sharing those. Who else has some tips and tricks for this, either on the company or the people? What else do you use? Yes, back here. Yep, that's you.
We said referrals, that if you're being referred in, that referrals can be a great source of information, whether it's on the individual or the company, maybe plans for the future, problems, competitors, and so they could give you that information.
Yeah, by definition, they know them, right? And so they're willing, hopefully willing to give you the referral. And so you just pick their brain real quick in terms of what do they know, what's the future, challenges they face, and those types of things. I like it. Back here, what else?
I think I've seen also used for the quarterly annual financial statements, especially like when you want to talk about the intent, just to sort of bring their pain points, the directions the company is going on. A lot of those informations are there in their quarterly or the annual reports. So that's also being used.
I've heard some people also mention quarterly calls as well, right? And so what is the difference between going to the annual report or listening to a quarterly call? Any insights on the differences between those two?
Q&A?
Say it again.
Q&A.
What about the Q&A?
So it's directly you're hearing this, like it's not a prepared response, right?
Yeah, is there a little bit of marketing involved in the annual report? Right, so a lot of people go in and read the letter from the CEO because it's the first thing and it's really easy to read. There's a lot of marketing involved in that. Although it was a tough year, and that's all that they mentioned about the tough year. But you get on a quarterly call, now there's an analyst on the line with you, firing some not so nice things at you, looking for your response. And so it's one thing to go to the annual report and get that information, knowing that they're challenged, it has to be real, but there's a nice side to it. They spin it a little bit, but you listen to the quarterly calls, all of a sudden there's some tough questions being asked, and it might be exactly what you're looking for to find the information you need. And so a couple different things there. Anything else? Good information. Anything else in terms of how to do this research? What do you think I'm going to ask you to do? Circle one or two, right? And so this is going to be part of the process going forward in implementation. So take a look at all of those on your list. Hopefully you wrote some down, and just circle the one or two things that you say, I've been meaning to for a long time, but I haven't. We're going to give you an entire week to focus on it. Actually, if you take a look at the bottom of this page, take a look at the bottom of page 18, how many weeks do we give you to focus on this? 2. All of week 4 is on researching companies. All of week 5 is on researching people. So you have 2 full weeks to focus on this concept of research. And so what are you going to use? And so again, the world is filled with good intent, right? I've been meaning to. I want to get in and update my LinkedIn profile. I want to do more in any reports. Here's your opportunity. And so circle 1 or 2 things that you'll commit to using more going forward. As we said earlier, we want to be able to literally just take those excuses away. So often, time, energy, those kind of things are the excuses that are offered. And by focusing for an entire week on these concepts, having lots of different opportunities to share some best practices and thinking, we want to be able to take those excuses away. As we wrap up this concept of prepare and these researching companies and people, any other questions on this concept? Questions, thoughts, ideas, pushbacks, concerns? Make sense? Pretty common sense, isn't it? It's just the doing part, and so we're going to break it down and help you with that during the implementation phase. All right, moving on, the next piece of this concept of preparation, as we said, there's really 2 pieces that Maria has focused on, is what we call defining value from your prospect's point of view. How many of you inside of your current companies and positions have gone through pretty significant training on the products and services that you offer and the things of value that you create? Anybody? Just a little bit or sometimes a lot? I think about some of my friends. I've got some friends that are in pharmaceutical sales. You think of that industry. Those people go through a lot of training. Oh my gosh, it's painful. Like months they're in training. I have a friend that just picked up a new drug, and it's like going back to school for him. He learned so much about that. So, and all of that is focused on who? It's all focused on us. It's all focused on our products and services and what we can do. And very often what we find is that we don't slow down to take the time to think about value from our client's point of view. So we're going to watch a video, and in this video I'm going to encourage you to take some notes. If you take a look, we're over on page kind of 20 and 21. If you'll turn back a page, on 19 there's actually a blank notes page. It's a really important video. And so as you watch this video, I'm going to encourage you to just take some speed notes, maybe some bullet points. And again, we'll do a group discussion as a table afterwards. Let's focus on this second step of preparation, which is slowing down to be able to define value from your prospect's point of view. Let's see what Maria does.
Let's check in with Maria again. Defining value from her prospective client's point of view is a process she has practiced and become quite good at. She does not want to be guessing when she interacts with possible prospects. She sits down at her desk and invests the time needed to focus, not on herself and her pressures and challenges, but on her client's situation. As she contemplates this person and their business, she thinks through what issues would they have to be facing in order to have any desire to speak with me for 5 minutes. She creates a list of issues, challenges, opportunities, struggles, goals, objectives. In essence, she has a mini brainstorming session where she challenges herself to see from her potential client's perspective. After thinking of all the issues, she begins to consider how those issues would show up in their business. So she develops a list of evidence. Just as a good lawyer will go to exhaustive lengths to gather evidence to prove their case, Maria thinks in the same way. She creates a list of all the evidence that she can gather: summaries, annual reports, analyst discussions, industry trends, information from websites, any and all evidence. The last step of her process is to consider the business impact on her prospective client dealing with those business issues. If her prospective client is experiencing these issues and they're showing up specifically in these ways, evidence, then these would be the expected impacts on their business. Having the issue is not the problem. It's the impact on the business that is the problem. Spending time to prepare does 2 things for Maria. First, it generates an understanding, a respect within herself that creates a sincere concern towards the individual she'll be approaching. Second, it builds the credibility she needs to become trusted and respected by her prospective client. Even if this particular prospect does not become an immediate client, she does not consider her preparation wasted. Much of what she has learned in preparation for one client can be applied to others on her priority list.
This is really one of the things that we call a difference that makes a difference. And so we really want to make sure that we get all the information that was in that video. So I'm going to welcome you to just turn to your table mates and have a brief discussion about some of the bullet points you wrote down or some things that you thought of in terms of what you heard in that video. And then we'll do some real work with this. So go ahead and have a table discussion. We'll see what you come up with. All right, let me pull you back in. So a lot of material inside that video. We're going to break this down piece by piece and go forward. But before we do the work, let's just discuss what you saw. And so who would volunteer a thought about what they saw and observed inside that video? If you just raise your hand, let me call on you. Yes.
I think that it's probably counterintuitive to most salespeople to spend that much time to prepare, that they would feel uncomfortable doing that, but it makes the most sense. I mean,
yeah, think about the word. It makes sense, but it's counterintuitive, right? And so,
well, you can stop and think about it. It makes sense, but
yeah.
Normal action of the day is I got to make calls. I got to make calls.
Got to make calls. Got to make calls. Got to make calls, right? And we said earlier, you're doing more of something that's not working a lot of times, and so that doesn't seem very intuitive. Yet it doesn't seem intuitive to stop and actually think through this before picking up the phone. And so, as we said, this is really a difference that can make a difference here. So I like that. So counterintuitive makes sense. Not very typical for a lot of folks. What else did you pick up inside of there? Go ahead.
Don't guess. No guessing.
No guessing, which means, talk to me a little bit more.
Go in, prepared, do your research so that you're not going in making assumptions. You have information to ask the right questions. You're not throwing out things that don't make sense, by showing you're prepared.
If you think about it, again, go back to the whole concept of the amygdala, right? And so the amygdala is going to make a judgment really, really quick based on what you say. And so what amount of research can I do to be prepared in my delivery of what I say that actually enhances that trust? And so it's worth that time. There was another one over here. Yeah.
Well, I thought one key thing that he said, for me, at least I wrote it down, was, not only understanding the business issue, but the impact of that issue. Because understanding is an interesting thing, but how relevant is it if you don't understand the impact to their business problems?
And if you remember, and I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but Craig said something to the effect of, it's not the fact that they have the issue that's the problem. So it's just if I have an issue and it's not impacting my business, so what? Think about ourselves. How many issues do we have that doesn't impact my life enough to do something about? And so it's not the fact that I have the issue itself, it's the business impact. And so can I get skilled enough at slowing down enough to not only think through the issues, but driving it all the way down to that business impact? That's where the real connection is going to occur. So if you take a look over on we're going to be looking on page 20, which is Maria's example, a full example of Maria's work. Page 21, which is a blank tool called Define Value from Your Client's Point of View. And then also on page 22. Take a look at page 22. There are a lot of what I call feeder questions, questions to really get your brain thinking in the capacity that we're asking it to think. Now, I'm going to break this down into each of the 3 sections, so try to stick with me and not work ahead. It'll really help you as you develop your list. First thing I want you to do is focus on, if we turn to page 21, I'm going to have you focus first just on the issues. Now let's think about issues from the video. What did he say about issues specifically? Forget evidence and impact, we'll get there. What did he say about issues? If someone said, I don't understand what you mean, how would you describe it to them? What did he say in the video? He said, what things would have to be happening for them to even have a desire to talk to you? You're going to reach out to them and try and start a business dialogue. Well, what would have to be going on in their world for them to even want to begin to have a conversation with you? Now, we call them issues here. What else could you call them? Opportunities. What else? Challenges. What else? Events. What else? Opportunities, goals, initiatives. They can call them a bunch of different things. We just choose to call them issues. So here's what I want you to do. If you need to, go back to your prospecting list that you just created on your prioritize tool. Think about those people. And then think about this concept of issues. As you think about it, read Maria's examples, turn over to page 22, read through all of those questions, make sure you read every single one of those questions, and begin to add to your issues list. So think about the issues that a person or an organization would have to be experiencing to even want to have a dialogue with you. If I didn't have these things going on, there'd be no reason for me to even talk to you. What are these things? And so spend a couple minutes just listing out your issues. Don't go on to evidence yet. Read Maria's examples, read all of those feeder questions on page 22, and begin to craft your list of issues. If you run out of space, that's a fantastic thing. Keep adding to the list. Just create another column or something like that. The more, the better. Let me pull you in for a second. We've got a table up here being very disruptive and talking as a group. Could that be a good thing? What do you think? If you're an intact sales team, if you've got a team working on products and services and there's a bunch of us collectively, would you want to do this siloed out on your own, or would you want to do it as a collective team? You want to do it as a team, right? And so they're having this dialogue because they're all in the same company, right? And so if you think about this tool, very useful as an individual. Sit down and think about it. You got a team of people that can synergize and think together. Sorry, I probably just freaked you guys all out. But if you think about it as a team, it's very beneficial to bring people together and think, okay, well, we're all going to market with this product. Let's really expand our thinking. Could it be valuable to get some marketing folks involved? Some people from design and implementation involved. So you think about it, the more people involved in this, the more comprehensive you can get this list, the better off you are. So continue to talk amongst yourselves. Sorry. All right, let me pull you in. Now again, you're going to come back and work on this during the implementation phase, during the playbook. So just want to get some ideas on the table. Who would be willing to share just one or two of the issues that you wrote down? Who'd be willing to share just one or two of the issues, opportunities, goals, whatever you wrote up? Anybody? Nobody's willing to share. Who would not be willing but would do it anyways? What'd you say? What were just one or two that you wrote down?
So actually, one of the things that I was having trouble with is identifying specific issues within the company without being able to talk to the company, right? Like to identify through research, right? So things like identifying that they have, 4 databases and they want to consolidate. Like that's not something that I think I could easily find kind of out there on the web. But what my colleagues had said is, if you're looking at a specific vertical, and you've spoken to a number of those organizations, they're all going to have similar pain points. So you can make the assumption that if clients A, B, and C have had those pain points, that they're probably also issues for D and F.
So you are making some assumptions here at this point, right? And so you're just thinking about it from a standpoint of maybe not the specifics that you've got 4 databases and you want to kind of boil that down and get more efficient with it. But if you even had any desire to speak with me at all, one of the things that may be going on for you is you've got some inefficiencies or ineffectiveness with your database. If you had that going on, that might be at least worth a conversation. So that'd be one we'd write down. So again, it's not, it's not getting to the point where you've defined it and you know it exactly. It's just, this is something they'd be experiencing from that standpoint. Who else would share just one or two issues that you came up with? Yes, what'd you have back there?
Mine's a little bit different, but it's because it's a consumer-based product, but shrinking sales of their product line, and then at the same time skyrocketing raw material costs.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you just think about it from the perspective that if your sales are going down, that would be a reason that we should probably be talking. If your sales were skyrocketing and you were double-digit growth year over year, you might not have a reason to talk to me. Even if I could figure something out, I'd give you my picture and you'd be like, yeah, no, my growth is doing just fantastic. We're doing great. And so you just think about it at that level. And so those are exact examples of what we're looking for in terms of issues. Once we get a healthy list of issues, and again, feel free to work in teams, get marketing involved, implementation, the more thinking about this, the better we are. Once we get the issues, we then move on to evidence. Now, let's go back to the video. When we talked about evidence, it's a step deeper. And each time we go down a step, just as Barbara said with impact, it's very different to get to impact. So when we get to evidence, a little bit more difficult than just the list of issues. What did it say in the video about evidence? Think back to the video. How did he talk about the concept of evidence? He gave a couple examples. Can we remember?
Gathering a list of all the evidence to prove your case.
Yeah, so prove your case. And what example did he give of that?
I don't remember.
History data. Remember we talked about being a lawyer? What did he say about being a lawyer? Do you remember?
They go out of their way to provide evidence.
they go out of their way, right? Think about a professional lawyer walking in. Is there an unprofessional lawyer? They may be. Think about a professional lawyer walking into a court of law. They're about ready to be judged, right? There will be a winner and a loser in that case. And most lawyers, worth their weight, prepare just a little bit, a lot, because it's their personal reputation at stake at that point in time. They prepare and prepare and prepare and over-prepare, and sometimes prepare the opposing counsel's case to know what's coming. Why? Because they're about ready to put their neck on the line. We do the same thing every day. I'm going to call you and say, there's reasons we should be talking. Oh yeah, how do you know? Think about answering that question. How do you know? That's the question you're trying to answer here. One of my favorite ones. So again, you're going to look at Maria's example, then you're going to look at the starter questions. One of my favorite starter questions to think about. Look over on page 22, the middle bullet there. If you could have access to your prospects' data and reports, what would you look for that would prove that they may have a problem? So I literally think about putting on my cloak of invisibility and having full access to their corporate offices. Where would I go? What data would I be looking at? What databases would I pull up? What files would I want exposure to? Whose office would I want to sit in and listen to their conversations? That's what we mean in terms of evidence. Yeah, they got these issues, but how are they showing up? What's the evidence that you can build in your business case to say, hey, these things are showing up, and they're showing up in these ways. So read Maria's example, read all of those starter questions on page 22, and see if you can list some evidence for yourself on page 21. Again, we'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to think about evidence. All right, let's pull you back in for this last step. And so again, how are these things showing up inside of their business is the concept of evidence. Can you prove your business case from that standpoint? And then the last area is this concept of impact. And so as it said in that video, the problem's not that they have the issues or that they're showing up in these ways. The problem is that my sales are down as a result of it. And they're down by 3.5% in the example that we were using earlier. And so how can I think about the customer's got this issue, it's showing up in these ways, and this is what it's costing them to have this problem. Think about it in terms of ourselves. Many times think about a medical issue. There is issues that we're experiencing. Think about someone that you may have known or yourself that you've got high blood pressure or diabetes or something like that. There's lots of issues. There's even some pretty good evidence. You can go to the doctor and you can see what my blood pressure has been and my diabetes record, but there's no impact. And if there's no impact, what do we do about it? Nothing, right? And it's not until there's impact, like all of a sudden it starts to interrupt my daily living, or I have a mild heart attack, or when the impact hits me, that's when I'll take action. Same exact thing for the business world. If you can't get your conversation down to impact level, there's no reason I should work with you. Why would I put money into you to buy your products and services if you're not going to do something for me? And that's really what impact is about. Take a look at Maria's examples, read all the starter questions on page 22, and then see if you can think about some impact. They have these issues showing up in these ways, and this is what it's costing them. This is the financial impact on their business. As we wrap up impact, turn over to page 22 and look at those starter questions, and I want you to circle that 4th bullet point. This is one that we find a lot of people struggle with, which is sometimes it's hard to prove the value of why you should do something with me, and sometimes it's a lot easier to prove the value of what's going to happen if you don't do something with me. Recently looked at, anybody live where there's hurricane opportunities? Recently had someone come out, I live in South Carolina, right on the ocean, and had to look into hurricane shutters. If you've never looked into what that is, they're really expensive. Had a really good salesperson talk to me and really demonstrate this in terms of financial impact of what happens if I choose not to put them on my house. So he actually literally had me look at my insurance documentation and look at the deductible if a hurricane hits my house, what I have to pay out of pocket first before the insurance kicks in. And it was a much, much, much larger number than what his price tag was. So he was actually really able to prove the financial impact from what happens if you don't do something about this. So very often we worry about proving, and sometimes it's easier to prove what happens if you don't do something about this. So always think about that in terms of financial impact. So if you think about this tool and you take a look at what you've got written down on page 21, do you think that as you do this for one client, that work you invest in one client works for many clients? Makes sense? And so when you think about this, now you take this, and when we come back from lunch, we're going to talk about getting into the planning aspects. I have all of these hypotheses, right? That's what they are at this point in time. They're the things I think. Then I go actually out and start meeting with some customers? Is there a chance to come back after having those business dialogues and refine this work? Because now I can talk to you about specifically how did those issues show up inside of your business. And they say something I didn't think about, boom, you write it into your issues list. Very quickly, you can get to a point where you've got a really solid document that serves the interest of most of the clients you're going to be facing yourselves with. Unless there's a major, major change in the market or a major change in your products and services, you've got a tool that's going to work just wonders for you going forward. So we've spent some time looking over the skill sets, the first 2 skill sets. When we come back from lunch, we're going to jump into the final skill set and really invest the rest of the day in this whole concept of planning. We're going to take a look at that prospecting call plan and really prepare you for when you leave here of getting out there and starting to make those dials to be able to say those things that are going to intrigue that person to have at least a business dialogue with you. So welcome back. And so as we come back from lunch, if you think about where we are, we're in the skill sets. So we've wrapped up 2 mindsets for the day so far. The whole concept of rethinking the funnel and the whole concept of intent counts more than technique. We've taken those mindsets and driven those into the skill sets and tool sets that Maria has begun to use as she's gone on this journey that you're about to embark upon. We're on to the third and actually final skill set, which is the concept of planning. And so as Maria has done her research, she's filled out her prioritized tool, she's got reason versus random in those criterion, she's ranked that, she knows who to call upon now. After that, she's done significant amounts of preparation and doing research on the company and the people so that when she reaches out, she's very confident in being able to have a business hypothesis. Here's why I think we should be talking. What I want to know is, do you think we should be talking as well? And she's prepared for that. Now, before making the call, the last thing she wants to do is to actually plan. And so for this whole part of the day, as we said earlier, we're actually going to have you work on this to create a plan for yourself that we want you to be prepared with. As soon as you leave here, you're ready to execute that plan. To do so, we're going to need you to take out a single sheet of your prospecting call plan. And so, as we said earlier, it's given to you in 2 ways. First is in this paper form. There's about 20 of these here if you want to use paper. Also, if you prefer to use the electronic versions, you've got the electronic version as well. So for today, I'm actually going to recommend that you just grab one of these, rip it off. You'll see there's a front and a back to it, and we're really going to invest pretty much the rest of the day on this concept of developing a plan. Now, as we think about this concept of planning, we are over on page 23 in your participant manual, and you see a myth there. And then you see a reality with a blank space. And we want to fill in that reality. And so it says the myth that is current thinking, and a myth we think, is that the purpose of a prospecting call is to get a meeting. And so the way we look at it is we would say the purpose of a prospecting call is not to make an appointment, nor is it to educate or entertain, although sometimes that might be helpful. If it's not to get an appointment nor to educate, what is the purpose of a prospecting call? What do you think goes on that reality?
Identify an opportunity.
Okay, so it could be to identify an opportunity, like that. What else could it be? What's the purpose of a prospecting call?
Create a relationship.
Okay, could be. Could be to start a relationship. What else could it be?
Starting the conversation to see if we should have mutual agreement and should we be talking.
Okay, and what if there isn't mutual value in our talking?
We made a connection and hopefully you'll think of me next time.
Yeah, and so if you think about it, the reality we want you to fill in there is the purpose of a prospecting call is actually to enable a decision. To enable a decision. If you think about any meeting you'd ever have with a client, how many of you have ever had one of those meetings that, it's an hour long, you get to the end of the meeting, and the end of the meeting ends up in a big, we'll get back to you. Have you ever had one of those? Those are just the greatest meetings in the world, right? You go through all this effort and there is no answer. And so if you think about it, we're looking for the yes. If you see that maybe, that's crossed out. We're not looking for a maybe. Send me some stuff in the mail. Call me back in 6 months. Those aren't what we're looking for. What we're looking for is that we provide what is needed for that prospect to be able to make a decision. Should we be talking, or, it's easier if we all say it together. I know it's hard to say sometimes. Should we be talking or not? Right? And no is an acceptable answer. And so from that standpoint, we're going to look at it through the lens that our purpose in working towards this prospecting call plan, working towards this initial contact, whether it be an email, a voicemail, an email, a text, a physical call, that your purpose is to enable a decision. Can I give you what you need in this short window of time to simply make a decision as to whether or not we should be talking? That's our purpose in looking at this. So we're going to recheck in with Craig and Maria to talk about this overall concept of a prospecting call plan. So if you want to take some notes, page 24, where you see the 4 elements, probably be a good place to just jot down some notes if you want to take some notes for the video. So let's check in with them and see how Maria does in developing her call plans.
Let's go back to Maria. She has prioritized her list of prospective clients, prepared herself to understand each of their relevant issues with evidence and a knowledge of how those issues are likely impacting their businesses. Now she creates a plan to make contact. Many of you have worked with generic call plans and call scripts in the past. Perhaps you even have a bad taste in your mouth towards rote dialogue when it comes to calling prospects. Well, so do we. We believe that a script is only successful if it helps your intent become more evident to the person that you're contacting. You'll notice that Maria takes the time to plan out each of her calls, recognizing that every prospective client has unique issues and circumstances. Since this is a first contact, Maria organizes her calling around 4 elements of the call plan. The end in mind sets forth the decision she would like the prospective client to make during her call. Questions help her think through what she wants to ask and the questions prospects will likely ask her. Yellow lights help her predict and prepare for potential stalls, doubts, and objections. And the opening statement is a script of what she'll say to introduce herself and engage the prospective client in a valuable dialogue. Maria's end in mind is simple. She wants her prospective client to sense her intent to help them and to make a single decision in that first call. That decision is, should we be talking? She isn't concerned about whether or not she will make the sale at this point. She simply wants the prospective client to discover the value of their interaction. Is there something the prospective client needs and something that she can provide that warrants a conversation? The interesting thing is that Maria also is exploring the question of whether or not they should be talking for her own sake. She does not want to waste her own valuable time. There is a possibility that she may have been wrong about the prospective client, and they don't have a reason to be talking. There is satisfaction in either a yes or a no when the end in mind is not a sale, but rather to find out, should we be talking at all? Maria then considers the questions she wants to ask her prospective clients. She lists them and even considers how they will likely answer. She considers follow-up questions based on possible responses. Then she thinks through the kinds of questions her prospective client might ask her, and she prepares her own responses. Maria thinks through the possible yellow lights. She asks herself, what kind of roadblocks and speed bumps might she encounter? She recognizes that she may not be able to guess all that might come up, but she finds value in the exercise of considering the possibilities. And finally, she scripts out an opening statement. Maria understands that she must communicate in that initial statement a message that will pique the prospective client's interest and demonstrate her intent. Preparing a call plan for each prospective client is what allows Maria's intent to naturally flow through. Likewise, planning and scripting and practicing before making contact is what allows you to communicate your intent effectively to help your prospective clients recognize your value.
Right, so as you heard Craig say in that video, we talk a lot about this concept of scripting. So as we work on this, we are going to work towards some scripts. Now, many of you, let me just ask, how many of you actually have a negative thought about the concept of scripting? How many of you have scripting in the past where it just didn't work for you, or it wasn't done well? How many of you can tell when you receive a call that is being scripted, right? And so from that standpoint, there's a lot of negative feelings about scripting. We don't feel that way. We feel the same way if it's done poorly. What we're going to work on is how do you get scripted to the point where you sound natural in your presentation. And so we're going to break this down piece by piece. And so as we go forward and discuss this, we're going to look at this thing called a prospecting call plan. So if you turn over to page 24, You see Maria there just hacking away at her computer, preparing herself. And so you see that there are 4 distinct areas of the prospecting call plan. It starts with this concept called an end in mind. Very simply stated, at the end of the call, what do you want the client to be able to decide? What do you want from them? What's the end in mind? Why are you making this phone call? Once we establish our end in mind, we move into the questions and say, okay, well, in preparation, as we plan for this call, what questions is the client going to most likely have? And how am I going to respond to those? Proactively thinking about that, as well as what questions do I still have for them? Again, this is mutual value. I've done some research. I don't know that you're a good client for me yet. And so what questions might I have for you? Once we wrap up the questions, we move into something we call yellow lights. We'll invest a pretty significant amount of time. When a client throws out a stall or a doubt or an objection, do we just fold and say, sorry? Or do we have something logical to respond back to really, truly figure out if we can create value? And then finally, we'll focus on something called the opening statements. When you open your mouth, when you start writing those words, what is it you're going to say? Very similar to your best shot that we worked on this morning with some more thinking applied to it. So that's really what the prospecting call plan is. We're going to break it down section by section, invest some time in it. As we said, importantly, that you're preparing to make a prospecting call when you walk out of here. So whoever was on that list, on your prioritized tool, that's what you're focusing on. That's the group that you're going to be working on. So let's break this down and take a look at it. Focusing first on this concept of an end in mind. So if you look over on page 25, if you actually take a look at the prospecting call plan sheet that you just ripped out, what do you notice about the end in mind section? Take a look at it. The end in mind says, what is it? It says, get clear on the end in mind. At the end of the call, what do you want them to decide? What do you notice about that section? It's top of the page, and it's filled in for you. Because in prospecting, in our world, there's only one end in mind, which is what? Should we be talking? It's really that simple. I've got some thinking. From my point of view, the only reason I'm calling you is because I think there's some reasons we should be talking. What I don't know is if you feel that same way. And so the purpose of this call is to mutually decide, should we be talking? And so the end in mind is filled in for you there on your sheet. Now, even though it's filled in, that is just the thinking about what you would want it to say. Take a look on page 25 and take a look at how Maria has said this. And so when you actually start to draft your opening statement, you're going to state the end in mind, but you're going to say it in your words. You're going to put it in your language, if you will. So some of the ways Maria has said it in the past, would you be interested in talking more? Another time she said, does it make sense for us to get together? She may have said, should we meet to explore this further? And so although that is your end in mind, should we be talking, when you language it, when you actually write it out and say it, you're going to put your own influence into how you actually say it. But very clearly, our end in mind for a prospecting call is simply to decide, should we be talking? I think there's reasons that we should. That's why I'm reaching out to you. What we need to decide in this short phone call is if you agree to the same. Should we be talking or not from that standpoint? So the end in mind for a prospecting call plan is really, really, really straightforward. Where we get into the nitty-gritty details is in the further elements of it. So we focused on the end in mind. Next thing we want to do is focus on the questions. And as you heard in the video, we kind of focus on questions in 2 different ways. So if you take a look over on page 26, when we think about questions, we think about it from the level of saying the quality of information that you get from your clients is directly related to the quality of the questions that you ask. So we want to focus on, if you think about it, when you make this contact, you know a lot about the prospect. You've done your research. You've done the research on the company, the person themselves, and yet there are things that you don't know. So when we think about the concepts of questions, I always think about the reality that it's really important to know what you know, yet more valuable to know what you don't know. So there's some things I don't know about you yet. As I'm determining if you're a good fit for me to work with, these are the 1 or 2 questions I want to fit into this conversation. Because I've done some research, but in that research there were a few key things I could not find out about you. It just wasn't public information. It wasn't something I could get my hands on. But in this initial dialogue, I want to ask them of you because I'm still vetting you as a potential client for me. It's mutual value. So thinking through the 1 or 2 things that I don't know about you yet that's going to help me to decide if this is indeed someone that we should be talking to. And then secondly, you heard on the video, is that she then turns her attention to the questions that they may ask of her. So as she reaches out and tries to determine this mutual value, probably some likely questions the customer's going to ask her. What are they, and how can I be prepared to respond to them? And so if you take a look at the bottom of page 26, you see Maria's call plan here. One of the things that we think adds value is being able to see examples. From here on out for the rest of the day, for every example, you'll see 3 of them. On page 26, you see Maria's, and that's her questions that she wants to ask as well as what she can anticipate. If you turn over to 27, you see 2 more examples. So for every section, there's actually going to be 3 complete examples for you to read through, be able to hear the language before you start to do your own work. And so on page 26, you see a couple questions that Maria has. So she's done her work, she's done her research, but yet, even doing that, she doesn't know these 2 things. First, it says, are security risks a top concern of yours like it is with most other IT managers today? Depending if they say yes or no, she says why or why not. And secondly, what would you most like to improve about how you manage your call center? Those are 2 things she was not able to locate that she finds of value. Those are 2 things I really want to work into this initial dialogue. Then she thinks about questions that they may ask of her. Can you just send me some literature on your call center solution? How many of you have heard that one? Can you just send me some stuff? Like, okay. She says, no, that's not how I'm going to respond. So look at her response. Sure, I'd be glad to. So that I use your time well, what information would be most helpful? And let's say that that information was exactly what you wanted it to say. What would you like to do next? And so she prepares for that potential question that they may ask her. As you read, go ahead and read page 27 as well. Read those 2 examples. And then what I would like you to do is turn your attention to your call plan. So here's some things we need to do as we think about that. At the top of the call plan, you see that it's got some demographic information. At the very top, it says company, contact date, and company contact. Go back to your prioritize list, figure out which client on there was the highest priority, and that's the one you want to start working with this for. So carry that client forward, put the company name right at the top. If you know when you're going to contact them, put that date in. If you know who you're going to contact, fill that in. And then think of this as your planning to reach out to that person. So our goal is that by the time we're done with this today, you're ready to go execute this prospecting call plan. So end in mind is already filled in for you. The first thing you got to figure out is the questions section. So you see on the front of the call plan, again, you see both of those areas. First, what questions do you want to ask of them? Again, it's not 3, 4, 5 of them. It's just 1 or 2. And then what questions may they ask of you, and how are you going to respond? We'll give you probably about a solid 5 minutes to fill this in. Again, think of this in terms of preparing yourself and planning for this upcoming call. If you have any questions as you work through it, just raise your hand and I will stop around and answer the question. So let's actually turn to our call plan and do some work. We'll give you about 5 minutes on these 3 sections. What 1 or 2 questions do you want to ask? What are they going to ask me? And how am I going to respond? All right, let me pull you back in. Many of you are still writing, and that's okay. There's going to be plenty of time to work on this, and we just want you to get a flavor for this at this point in time. So if you think about that question section, it's twofold. And so it's what am I still not knowing that I need to know as I court this customer, and what can I anticipate coming from them, and how do I best prepare for that so that it's a solid, well thought out, prepared response to that. Now, when you think about the concept of questions, some questions elevate themselves to the point of almost being an objection. And we kind of look at those a little bit differently. We refer to those as yellow lights. So if you take a look over on page 28 in your participant guidebook, the next phase of our plan after we address questions is to focus on something that we refer to as yellow lights. Now, to exemplify what these are, we're going to turn our attention back to Maria in a video to understand this concept of yellow light. So if you want to take notes, page 28 in your manual would be a good place to jot down some notes for this. So let's take a look at this concept of yellow lights.
Yellow lights are situations in prospecting where either you or the prospective client feels the need to slow down or back away from the conversation. They are not enemies to overcome. In fact, upon investigation, they may be a valid reason for not meeting. Yellow lights are merely something to explore, and then have the prospective client turn it to either green or red. Some yellow lights are predictable, and you should think them through in advance. Others appear unexpectedly, but you can use a repeatable process to work through them effectively. What are some of the predictable yellow lights you might encounter on initial calls to people that you've never met? Here are a few that we commonly hear. I don't have time right now, or I'm not interested. We don't have problems or concerns in that area. We're already working on that issue, internally or with someone else. We don't have any budget for anything. Based on our experience working with yellow lights, we've developed a process that you can use to respond to any type of yellow light, whether predictable or unexpected. We call this process acknowledge and resolve. To acknowledge, slow down and see the yellow light from the other person's point of view, even though you may not agree with it. Ask questions about the true nature of the prospective client's resistance. And to resolve, hand the concern back to them for resolution. In the end, we show our intent by our sincere effort to acknowledge and resolve the real issues for our prospective clients. In many instances, it's the process of dealing with yellow lights that builds our trust.
Okay, as we've done in the past, a couple of key things in there. I see some of you jotting down some notes. Let's turn to our table partners and just have a quick debrief with our table in terms of what are the key thoughts and takeaways from that video on yellow light. So if you have just a table conversation, then we'll do a large group debrief. All right, so let's share with each other. Who has a thought or a takeaway they would share with the larger group in terms of this concept of yellow lights? If you just raise your hand, who has a thought or a concept to share with the group? A lot of talking going on.
I just think it goes back to preparation again, that you can pre-thought so that when that objection or that yellow light comes up, you're not startled by it. Actually, okay. The answer is all.
Yeah, so there's a couple things in the video. What allows you to have that freedom to just not have that startled look? What did it say in the video? So enabling the no is a big piece of it. So if you say no, I'm okay with that. So I'm not efforting for this to try and get you to say yes, I'm okay with no. It's part of it. What else would you say?
Address and resolve with you.
So having the preparation of the acknowledge and the resolve is part of it. What's another part of it? Key part of being okay with that. Go back to intent, right? And so what's our intent? It's not to get a meeting. It's to enable a yes or a no. It's to enable the decision. And so if we think about it through that lens, it helps us be prepared, have thought out, and not ever have that kind of deer in the headlights look where we didn't expect that to be happening. Don't even know how to respond to that. And so that's back to that concept of intent sets you free. I'm free to handle whatever you throw at me because my only goal is to help you make a decision, yes or no. And so let's just talk about that. If it makes sense to me, let's do. If not, then let's not. What else do you take away from that video in terms of yellow lights? Anything else? Over
I
here?
think it's really important to acknowledge them. It's really important to, like we were talking at the table here, to stop and say that, listen and respond, because I think it's really important for people to, because they kind of feel like you're on the defense when they hear, sometimes you get on defense when you hear yellow lights,
Yeah.
versus acknowledging it and having a mutual agreement that we acknowledge it and how we go from here.
Yeah. And that expresses the importance of having the end in mind be what we have it. Because if my goal is to get an appointment, to make a sale, and I hear you object against that, I become defensive because you're out now countering what I wanted. And so it's punch, counter punch. You become defensive and I find some way. And so it just goes down the whole wrong path. If my intent is to simply help you make a good decision in a mutual beneficial way, then when I hear that objection, that stall, that doubt, I just acknowledge it. Well, it makes sense you're very busy, and I just acknowledge what I've heard from that person. And you'll notice a lot of what we do is based on patterns or breaking of patterns. And that acknowledged piece is breaking of a pattern because they expect to fight. They expect us to come back with something, to convince them, to tell them why they should, and we don't. We just simply say, well, it makes sense you're very busy, Barbara. And then I have a resolve to come back with that. And so those are those keys that you pick up on as we think about yellow light. So take a look over on page 28, and let's think about some of the key thoughts as we think about these concepts of yellow light. So very first thing there on the page on 28 is to slow down for yellow lights. We've heard a couple times today where things are counterintuitive. Does this seem a little bit counterintuitive? Because for a lot of salespeople, when they get the yellow light, what do? They speed up. right? It's like you stick your fingers in the ear and go, no, 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 I'm going to act like I didn't hear that because I got to get the sale. We're just going to go forward, and we just literally fly right through it. And so it seems counterintuitive for a lot, but it's the key to success when you focus on creating mutual value. When you encounter the yellow light, slow down. Let's find a way to mutually figure out if this is going to turn to red or green. Second thing you see there on that page is that yellow lights are an opportunity to express your intent and desire to create mutual value. Doesn't that sound pretty? The heck does that mean? So if you think about it, it sounds good. Yellow lights are an opportunity to express your intent and desire to create mutual value. What? What does that mean? Someone put that in your own words. What does that really mean? What would you say?
Well, I do think they're a great opportunity. I spend a lot of time planning for yellow lights because when you encounter it, it's how the client sees your handling of those situations and what you're really there for. So I think it is, yellow lights don't really scare me because you do get that chance to break down the walls and have a real conversation.
Yeah, as long as you're approaching them with good intent, right? And so if my intent's in the right space and it's only to create mutual value or not, then there's nothing to fear in them. The fear comes from the fact that I'm pressing to get a sale and I don't know how to respond to that to keep this thing going forward. Well, that's not my goal. My goal is to not keep this thing going forward if there's not mutual value. And so it's back to that concept of intent sets me free. But it's very different than a lot of the way people think about this. So it's our chance, if you think about it, any stall, doubt, or objection you ever get here or anywhere in the sales process is nothing more than a question of your intent. Are you here to sell me something? Are you here to do something to me? When they offer a stall or a doubt, they're just questioning your intent. And so how you respond in that moment clearly expresses your intent to them. So if I, as Barbara said, if I go back and acknowledge that you've said that, that builds trust, it builds rapport. I am listening to you. I understand you're very busy and this might not make sense at this point. Let's work towards mutual resolution to this. And so it's always your chance to express your intent. Third, and again, these just get a little more different as we go on, if you're going to hit a red light, the sooner the better. This is one of those keys to effective salespeople. They learned this a long time ago. Man, if it's going to be red, let's get it red as soon as we can. If we can create mutual value, let's create it together. If there's new mutual value to be created, then let's get to that no as quick as we can so that I can go on to create value for someone else and you can find someone who can create the value that you're looking for. Think about it. How many times you've had a deal finally die. It was a long, slow, painful death. And if you're really honest with yourself, you can look back sometimes days and weeks into the sales cycle and think about when it really died. And it's usually not the same day that it actually dies in your pipeline. There's usually a gap in between there. You can look back and say, it was 3 weeks ago when I showed up for that meeting the CFO was supposed to be there for, and there was an excuse as to why he wasn't there. That's when it actually died. And so if I'd have been much better at handling that yellow light in that moment, I might have found out a lot earlier that this thing was actually going to turn red. Think about the time and money we waste chasing those. And so that fourth bullet point is that red lights are not failure. Red lights are to be expected in business, aren't they? I've never found a salesperson yet that always got green everywhere they went, right? And so we're looking for the red lights. We're not going to be able to help everybody. And so what failure is making those red lights needlessly more expensive and time-consuming than they really are. So let's do great business together if we can, and if we can't, let's just be okay with that. Save the relationship, as we've said, for later points in time. So this is a lot to take in and very counterintuitive for a lot of people as they press. Think about it. We effort, we press. A lot of times that's our first sign of a yellow light in a deal is when we see the salesperson efforting and pressing and trying to solve, trying to create, well, what if we, and they're literally grasping at straws to try and figure out how. Desperation fits in. You're just like, need that. No, wait, time out. Hold on, you're efforting for this more than the client is. And so we really have to embrace these concepts when we think about this concept of yellow lights. So in the video, you learned a very simple two-part response. Very simple, very challenging to put into play. And so one of the things we want to do is practice this here in the session, as well as get you to practice this in the implementation phase in the weeks going forward. So the steps were very, very, very simple. The very first one, we kind of talked a little bit about this, was to simply acknowledge what's going on. So whatever the client says to you or the prospect says to you, just simply acknowledge what they've said. So as you see on the card, it says pause and respect their perspective. That's that slow down, pause, just literally slow down, respect what they've said to you. It may sound like, well, that makes sense that you're very busy. Well, I understand that you're already working with this internally or with another organization. I can appreciate that that's a concern for you. And it's just that pattern interrupter to slow down and simply acknowledge what the person has said to you. The second part is a little more tricky. The second part is to move to a resolution. So it's for you to propose a solution at this moment in time and then hand it back to the customer to make the decision. Whose responsibility is it to turn the yellow light to either green or red? It's the client's, right? A lot of times we take that on. What I want to do is offer a resolution and then turn it back for you to make a decision that we go forward and it's green or it's red. And so again, you see, would you be open to? Would you consider that? Considering all of this, should we? And so you're going to offer a resolution as to how we could solve this potential yellow light and then hand it back to the client in terms of what they should do. So in terms of understanding this, let's actually watch Maria handle several of these common situations. In the first video, if you didn't pick it up, Craig said a lot of these yellow lights are predictable. How many of you can think of some common yellow lights that you get right now? They're predictable. And so if they're predictable, then we should be prepared for them. And so let's watch Maria and listen to her language patterns as she begins to kind of resolve some of these yellow lights. And so here's Craig and Maria talking about how to handle these yellow lights.
Let's look at a few examples of Maria dealing with yellow lights. A prospective client might say, "Your organization is too expensive compared to the competition." To which Maria might respond,
I appreciate your candor and concern that we may be too expensive. I believe affordability is really a question of value added. What value would need to be created by someone so that your company would consider it worth your while?
even though Maria truly believes she has value to add that's worth the cost, she's careful to acknowledge and then hand it back to them for resolution. In another instance, a prospective client might say, "I can't talk with you right now." To which Maria might respond,
Just quickly, I may have caught you at a bad time, or you may have a sense that there isn't any value in talking with me. Would it make sense for us to find another time?
This is a very common yellow light. It's important for Maria to know if they're just trying to get rid of her or if it really is a bad time. As another example, a prospective client could say, "I'm really not interested." Maria might then say,
I want to make sure I don't waste your time. Based on research I've done, it seems there is an opportunity for our companies to do great work together. Perhaps there is someone else I should be talking to. Would you have a couple of minutes to discuss what I have uncovered to better understand who, if anyone at all, I should be talking with?
Or a prospective client might say, "Your company doesn't have the industry expertise that we would require." Maria could respond by saying,
I can appreciate your desire to work with someone with sufficient experience. There is nothing worse than finding out late that the partnership is lacking expertise. What would allow you to feel comfortable that we do have the experience that you're looking for in a partner?
Let's remember the big picture. When handling yellow lights, you're trying to see if there's a fit between what you do well and what a prospective client wants, needs, or values. If they don't want, need, or value what you do, and if no one else in their company does either, then you have your answer. Perhaps not the answer you were looking for, but an answer nonetheless.
So very important there towards the end, he said, remember the big picture. And so we've got to focus on why we're doing what we're doing at this point in time. When we think about these yellow lights, what we want to do now is give you an opportunity to actually try some of these. And so if you take a look over on page 30 in your book, you're going to see a lot of samples and things like that that we're going to refer to as we have you do your yellow lights. But before that, we want to have a chance to actually get you to run some of these yellow lights through a practice exercise. And so I need everybody to go ahead and take out their deck of cards that you were given this morning. As we said this morning, the orange cards are kind of the refresher series, if you will. So if you think of these are all of the mindset, skill sets, and tool sets that we focus on all day long, just in a very brief format for you to focus on in the weeks ahead during the implementation phase. As you get into the yellow section, you'll see we're on card 15, if you look at the numbers on them. You actually see, again, card 15 and 16 is just the exemplification of yellow lights. And so it's everything we just talked about. When you get to card 17, that's where we want you to focus. So if you take a look at card 17 and the rest of the cards thereafter, these are those common objections that a lot of people hear. So as I'm reaching out to you, my prospect, if you look at the very first card, you might hear someone say, well, I've heard that your fees are too expensive. If you notice, the first step was to acknowledge, right? Is there a difference between acknowledge and agreeing? Right? It's not agreeing with, well, you're right, but we're worth it. So you're not agreeing with it, you're simply acknowledging what they say. So take a look at the back of this one specifically. The acknowledge says, thank you for sharing your perspective. So you're not agreeing with, you're just acknowledging that the person has heard that you're too expensive. You can't argue with it, they've heard that. Say, well, thanks for sharing your perspective. And then you go into the resolution. It says, all the organizations we currently do business with, including many that you would know, have found value in our pricing. It seems we would have to at least have a short conversation to help determine if we could offer the same level of value to you. How could you and I best make that happen? Does that make logical sense? That's all we're asking for, right? And so when you think about these, as you turn the cards over and you look at the responses, it's very important to think about the responses from a standpoint of the pattern of the response. Many of you may look at that and instantaneously say, man, I would never say something like that. Then guess what? Don't say something like that, right? Use your language, but we need it to be in the acknowledge, resolve process. So what we want to do is have you partner with a person and run through some of these cards. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. We have been at our tables all day long. Maybe you sat with someone different at lunch, but we're going to give you an opportunity to meet some new folks. So here's what I want you to do. When I say go, you're going to stand up from where you are, remain standing for the entire exercise, and just cross over the room and find someone new. Introduce yourself to that person, tell them a little bit about what you do, and then you're going to practice these cards. Now here's how the practice is going to work. I'm going to partner with, say I partner with Ryan. We're just going to decide who's going to role play which part first. I'm going to say, okay, Ryan, I'll volunteer here to go first. Why don't you play the salesperson first? I'll play the client. So I look at my very first card, and I just read that statement right to Ryan. So it's as if she's called me on the phone and I just simply say, well, your company doesn't have the industry expertise that we would require. Now, Ryan's responsibility is to do what? Just simply acknowledge and resolve. Now, her responsibility is not to go, well, Sean, I can appreciate your concerns with our experience. We would not, unless you plan on keeping these in your pocket or something and pulling them out when the client says something, we're not just reading these on the back. Leave it covered and try it. Just think, how would I just simply acknowledge that? Try an acknowledgement statement, then try a resolution. First couple will feel a little bit different because it's a very different process. You'll start learning the pattern. Once she's tried it, then we both turn the card over and read it together. It's very important that you read the answers on the back. Again, they're not right or wrong answers. Don't judge them. They're all right. We wrote them all. But they might not be written how you would say it. And so just learn the pattern and then adjust it to the way you would say it. Any questions on the exercise? There's lots of cards. We're going to leave you in this exercise for a solid 10 minutes or so. I'll be walking around listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hands and stick to the exercise. Try and complete all of the cards. Any questions? All right, jump up, remain standing, find a new person, introduce yourself, and let's practice yellow lights. All right, so let me ask you a rather simple question that sometimes does not have a simple answer. How'd that go?
Went good.
It went
Very
good. Okay. And by good, you mean?
So being able to just get up and experience the exercise, not just hear about it, see it on a video, but being able to interact and seeing the facial expressions and just being part of it.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a difference between reading it on a piece of paper, seeing Maria do it, and actually doing it in person. Yeah. And so just being able to run, like we say, run some water through the pipes, actually do it, there's a good feeling to that. How else did it go for you? How else did you experience that exercise? What would you say?
I think it just shows that you really need to practice and practice and practice this so that it becomes second nature. So the first couple were a lot more awkward than, a couple more down the road. So just going back and actually doing it.
Yeah, so probably practice them at least one more time, right? Yeah. Yeah, so again, how long do you think we're going to spend on this in the implementation phase? Anybody want to guess? A week, right? And so one of the weeks is going to be focused just on yellow lights. You've got these practice cards. We're actually going to have you write some of your own here very soon. The realization is we don't generally think this way. It's just not a common pattern that we're ready to and we just do. It's just not common. And so to get there, to have ourselves just respond as that's the way we think, takes some practice. And so we're going to come back in one of the weeks in the implementation phase during the playbook and focus strictly on yellow lights. If you're working in an intact team, pick up the cell phone, call someone and say, your fees are way too expensive. Don't even tell them who it is, just say that. And someone's got to come up that quickly, because that's what it is on a call, right? Someone says, well, we really don't have time, and that's how fast you have to get that. And so the practice really becomes key to this. And you even felt the difference probably between the first card and the last card you did, just that quickly you start to get the pattern. So the ones you just practiced were actually ones that we came up with, and some of them are very common, some of them you may get often, and some of them there may be some that are even more appropriate to you. So if you go into your participant materials, in the back of those yellow light cards, actually starting on card 43, you'll see 3 blank yellow light cards. Now, what we want you to do with these is to create some common yellow lights of your own. And so we've put many in there. There's probably 10 or 12 different examples. Some of them may be right on and some of them may be a little bit off base for what you commonly hear. So what we want you to think about is, what are some of the common stalls, doubts, and objections that I get specifically for my product, my company? What's real for me? And we want you to write those objections right on the front of the card. Once you put 3 of them down, turn them over and think about it from a standpoint, if I had to acknowledge and resolve that, how would I say it? And really put some thinking into it. Once you create these, we'll give you 5 minutes or so to create these. Once you create them, you're actually going to find a new partner you haven't met yet today. Introduce yourself to that person, and then you're actually going to fire off your yellow lights to that person. So I'm going to be working directly with Clayton. I'm going to say, Clayton, one of the objections I usually get is da-da-da-da-da. I'm going to read my yellow light right to him, give him a chance to give me an acknowledge and resolve. Now, in listening to him, if I'm really smart, I'll actually take that feedback and think about, well, that's how Clayton said it. This is how I would have said it, and I might actually tweak my own responses from that point. You'll do all 3 cards with a brand new partner to get some practice on some that are specific for you. To start that, we need you to write your cards. And so if you'll just grab those 3 blank cards, think of yellow lights that were not in the set that were given to you, that are very common to you, and then write some drafting. And don't even think about it being permanent, just draft and acknowledge and a resolve for each. We give you about 5 minutes to do that part. All right, so as we said earlier, what we're going to do now is we're going to find a brand new partner. So again, reach outside your comfort zone, cross the middle line of the room if you want to, find someone brand new. When you find that partner, you're going to read and just go back and forth. You go one and then they'll go one. Read your objection, your stall, your doubt, your yellow light to them. And then they're going to have to give an acknowledgement and a resolve back. Now, listen closely when they talk, because they're giving you their insights as to what they would say to this. You've drafted some stuff on the back of your yellow light card. Take their thinking, take some notes on that, see if you can't work on creating a better response after hearing their response from that standpoint. Go through all 3 cards back and forth with the 2 of you, and then we'll debrief the exercise and actually do our own yellow lights on our prospecting call plan. All right, go ahead, find a partner. We'll give you about 5 minutes to complete the exercise, and we'll come back together. All right, so now we have an exercise where we actually draft our own and have someone respond to those. How many of you found some value in having someone else respond to your objection? Again, it's just a different way to think about it. And so take that input, redraft your responses, and just continue to push on that. Obviously, the end goal here is to put this thinking into our prospecting call plan. So let's take a look at Maria's example. You see it on page 30 in your participant guide. So as Maria thinks about her prospect coming up, the possible objection she thinks about is we have other projects that are higher in priority than this one. So she's reaching out on a specific product or service that she's going to take to them. They say that they've got another project that's higher. And so she acknowledges by simply saying, well, that seems fair enough. And then she goes into her resolve. In conducting research on your company, it seems that this could add significant value. If I could show you how we came up with those figures, would that be a good use of your time? So you resolve it and hand it back to the customer. Now, if you take a look at your call plans that you've been working on all day, the very bottom of that front page, there's an area that says yellow lights and how are you going to respond. Our thinking at this point in time is between the ones that we gave you and the 3 that you just drafted, probably some of those are the ones that are on here. So we don't want you to specifically redraft a response because you've just done some of that work. But just think about for a minute of all those you just practiced, which yellow lights, based on this prospect, based on what your positioning is going to be, what yellow lights can you anticipate? So just pick maybe 2 of them through all the cards you just went through that you can anticipate you may hear from this client. And just put down those objections on that left-hand side. Think of this prospect in particular as you reach out. Just maybe 1 or 2, what objections, stalls, doubts, what we call yellow lights can you anticipate? Now again, if you think about it, you would want to practice the responses to that until it becomes second nature so that when they offer those objections to you, you've got down the language of responding. Before we send you on break, as we wrap up this part of yellow lights, one thing I'd like to actually do is take you into this specific week in your implementation journey going forward. So if you will, go back into our playbook that we were in this morning, and I would like you to find week number 7. Week number 7. As you find that, can I have someone just volunteer to read the title of the week and the end in mind for this specific week? Would someone, by raising their hands, volunteer to read the end in mind and the title for this specific week? Would you go ahead and read that for us?
Call plan questions and yellow lights.
Okay.
Week 7, end in mind, you are confident and prepared for questions and yellow lights.
Okay. So as you see, the title of each of the weeks of the playbook shows you clearly what you're going to be working on. So 2 sections of the prospecting call plan, questions and yellow lights, are the focus for this week. At the end of this week, if I do this work, where do I want to be? That's the end in mind. That I am confident and prepared for questions and yellow lights as I address my prospects. Now, there's some actions in each one. Would anybody volunteer to read the 5 actions that are listed there on that page? Would you read that for me, please?
Watch the video questions. Watch the video yellow lights. Review the yellow lights practice cards from the work session. Based on your learning since the work session, create 2 additional yellow lights cards. Review the quick reference guide for yellow lights.
Yeah. And so keep in mind, as we said this morning, the electronic resource that you have, either the USB or the CD-ROM, contains all the videos and the electronic resources. And so the 2 videos that are mentioned on here, they're right on this thumb drive, as well as the quick reference guide for yellow lights. It's more and additional thinking about the concepts of yellow lights. There's also in each week what we call success tips. Can I have one more person volunteer to read the success tips off of this page? Would you go ahead and read it for me, please? Thank you.
Work to understand the question behind the question. Address yellow lights with high courage and high consideration. If you hear it, sense it, feel it, find a way to say it tactfully.
Okay. So as we said this morning in our promise video, your willingness to jump in and actually do these week by week by week is what's going to determine your success in this journey. And so as we go on break, I just wanted to highlight for you what it looked like in one specific week, and this is the week on yellow lights. So as we leave that yellow lights section, let's go ahead and wrap up for a break.